In a town that seemed to be untouched by time, where the streets were cobblestone and the lampposts flickered like something out of a forgotten era, there stood a restaurant known as the Willow's End. It had been serving the community for generations, its walls steeped in history, its food rich with tradition. Locals would often speak of it with reverence, calling it a haven for those seeking a taste of comfort and warmth. Its signature dish, a stew made from a secret recipe passed down through the generations, had earned it fame beyond the town's borders. But the restaurant was also known for something else, something much darker. The silent waiter, as he was called, had worked there for as long as anyone could remember. His name was never spoken aloud. He had no backstory, no family, no past. He was simply a fixture of the restaurant, appearing every evening without fail. His movements were graceful yet eerie, as if he glided rather than walked, his pale face expressionless, his eyes vacant. He wore the same black and white uniform every night, his hair slicked back in a way that seemed to defy time. No one ever questioned him. No one except for Harold, a regular who had been coming to the Willow's End for years. Harold was an avid lover of mysteries, and there was something about the silent waiter that intrigued him. His gaze would always follow the waiter as he moved between tables, serving customers without uttering a single word. One evening after finishing his meal, Harold found himself once again staring at the silent waiter, who was standing near the bar, observing the room with his usual stillness. He could feel a strange chill in the air, as if something was amiss, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Curiosity gnawed at him. "Excuse me," Harold called to the young waitress, Emily, who was passing by. "Can you tell me something about him?" He gestured toward the silent waiter, who was now holding a tray of drinks, his face fixed in an unnerving expression of detachment. Emily hesitated, glancing nervously at the waiter, as if she feared speaking too loudly. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. "No one talks about him," she said. "He's been here forever, but no one really knows anything about him. He just does his job, quietly, efficiently. It's like he's always been here." Harold's curiosity deepened, but he didn't want to press the matter further in front of the other customers. He simply nodded and returned to his meal, though his mind raced with questions. How could someone work in a place for so long without anyone asking about their past? And why was this waiter so unnerving? The evening went on without incident, but as Harold finished his meal and prepared to leave, he noticed something strange. As he walked toward the exit, the silent waiter was standing near the door, holding it open for him. It was a simple, polite gesture, yet the air felt thick with an unspoken tension. Harold nodded in thanks, but as he stepped outside into the cool night air, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. The moment he stepped onto the sidewalk, he heard a voice from behind him. "He's back again tonight." It was the busboy speaking to the manager, George, in hushed tones. Harold stopped in his tracks, turning slightly to listen. "He's been here for 5 years now," the busboy continued, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "But it's like he never left. Every night he shows up, as if nothing happened." George sighed, his voice strained. "I don't know what to make of it. He was in that car crash, you remember? We all heard about it. He died that night, but every evening he shows up, as though he's still alive, still working here. It's like he's trapped in this place. I don't know why, but I don't think he ever will leave." Harold's heart began to race. "What do you mean trapped?" he asked, unable to mask his growing fear. George glanced over his shoulder at the silent waiter, who stood by the door, still as a statue. "I don't know. Some people say he's a ghost. Some think he's cursed. But he never says a word. He just works, night after night. The best waiter this place ever had before the crash." Harold's mind was reeling. The waiter, had he really died in that accident? Could he be some sort of spirit, cursed to serve forever in the restaurant he once worked in? He glanced back at the silent figure, his thoughts swirling in confusion and dread. As the days passed, Harold couldn't get the thought of the silent waiter out of his head. He returned to the Willow's End several times, each visit leaving him more unsettled. Every time the waiter was there, moving silently through the room, serving food and drinks with an eerie precision. It was as if the man had never left, his movements the same as they had always been, as though nothing had changed. But then, one evening, things took a turn. Harold arrived to find the restaurant eerily empty. There were only a few patrons scattered across the tables, and the atmosphere felt heavier than usual. The silent waiter was there, of course, gliding between the tables. But tonight there was something different about him. His eyes, once vacant, now seemed aware, and his movements were slower, more deliberate, as though he were struggling with some invisible force. Harold couldn't look away. He decided to confront George, who was standing by the bar, watching the waiter with an expression of quiet sorrow. "What's happening to him?" Harold asked, his voice tight with fear. "He's not the same." George looked at Harold, his face pale and weary. "I don't know, Harold. I think he's trying to move on, but he can't. There's something about this place, something that keeps him here. People say that the night he died, his spirit got caught in the restaurant, and now he's trapped here, forever serving, never able to speak, never able to leave." Harold stared at the waiter, who was now standing motionless near the kitchen, his head slightly tilted as though listening for something. A strange, unearthly noise seemed to fill the room, faint whispers that no one else seemed to hear. "I think," George continued, his voice shaking, "he's waiting for something. Something that happened. Something he did. But I don't think he will ever get it." Suddenly, the restaurant's lights flickered, and the temperature dropped. Harold's breath became visible in the air, and the whispers grew louder, filling his ears with an unholy chant. The silent waiter turned toward Harold, his eyes locking with his in a way that sent a wave of dread through his body. The moment their gazes met, Harold understood. He wasn't just a ghost. He was trapped. The silent waiter was bound to the restaurant, to the town, and to his duties, never to escape. A shadow moved behind him, and when Harold turned around, he saw his own reflection in the window, a reflection that smiled back at him with an empty, knowing grin. Harold never returned to the Willow's End again, and as the years went by, the restaurant slowly fell into disrepair. No one dared to speak of the silent waiter anymore, but late at night, if you listened carefully, you could hear the faint sound of footsteps, the soft clink of silverware, and the quiet whispers that lingered in the air. And always in the shadows, the waiter would be there, serving, silent, waiting, forever. The end.